In 1352, the world was in a real mess. The Black Plague was everywhere, leaving death in its wake. Every city and village had bodies piled up, men, women, kids, like they were just forgotten debris. The whole atmosphere felt cursed, and life basically came to a halt. In their hopelessness, some desperate folks turned to dark knowledge. They found scrolls hidden away in catacombs and ancient texts buried in the sand, things that were best left alone. But when you're in pain, you stop thinking straight. They called it the ritual of the second incursion. It was supposed to be a summoning, to call on the gods for help when nothing else worked. The ritual happened quietly under blood-red moons. Who spoke the last words? Nobody knows. What we do know is that afterward the skies turned dark, not from storms, but from something old and unknown. Then they came. There was no fire, no rumble of thunder. Just a strange silence. They shot through the sky like beams wrapped in darkness, crashing down across the globe, in places like the Carpathians, the Zambezi, the Indus River, the Amazon, and the North Sea. No one had a clue what they were. The people sent to check it out never came back. We were left in the dark about what just happened. I was there at the East Gate. Everyone was kneeling, everyone but me. I thought, this isn't a god, it's death pretending to be nice. And then he looked at me. I was frozen, not even able to pray. Page 7, Journal of Brother Kuta of Onitsha. In the weeks that followed, women started disappearing. Some were taken forcefully at night, others left on their own, wandering into the woods or ruins like they were being pulled by something invisible. Then we started spotting them. Strange creatures hiding in our forests and caves, villages were burned, whole communities were wiped out. These creatures had sharp teeth, unsettling eyes, and strength like nothing we'd seen. Their screams were deafening. Eventually, brave soldiers tried to hunt them down, but it didn't work. Sure, we took down a few, but they just kept breeding like crazy. We named them the Fallen. At first, they stuck to the outskirts, the old ruins and dark woods, but they spread out more and soon began to take over. Villages disappeared, roads went silent, cities were swallowed by darkness and claws. The leaders of kingdoms saw this and shut their gates tight. What they hoped to achieve, no one knows. They stopped sending messengers and ignored calls for help. The first real effort came from Oba Eweka, the second of the Benin kingdom. He was a strong king who cared for his people and sent his best soldiers into the forests where the Fallen had gathered. They were well prepared. They never came back. The first major loss in Europe was Bohemia. King Alaric IV, a tough ruler shaped by war and plague, led his knights into the hills after hearing about glowing beings luring villagers into the fog. He rode at the front, holding his banner high, with a sword that had never broken in battle. But that day it did. His body was never found. Just weeks later, Prague was in flames, and the kingdom fell apart by winter. 13 months later, Benin City shook with the roar of beasts. The Oba died fighting, spear in hand. His body was lost too. And then, one by one, the kingdoms tumbled. France, still recovering from the plague, couldn't hold strong. The Castile knights were overrun. The temples of Angkor went silent. In Mali, the great towers of Timbuktu burned. Japan's shogunate crumbled under the pressure of the unseen enemy. Kingdom after kingdom fell apart. In the year 1420, the kingdoms of men were in shambles, and instead of banding together, people were just blaming each other. Some pointed fingers at one another, while others said it was due to sins or pagan worship. Even with the Fallen causing chaos everywhere, humanity remained split. Cities fell one after another, and survivors got picked off in the dark. The Fallen kept wreaking havoc, and no matter what they did, humanity's weapons just didn't hold up. Armor crumbled, swords broke, and shields did little to help. It was a slow decline. But then, in the ruins of Timbuktu, a few dedicated librarians clung to the last bits of written knowledge, and a spark of hope emerged. A young blacksmith named Amasten worked quietly for 5 years, going through ancient scrolls and old diagrams, looking for a way to help mankind fight back. Finally, he finished a massive suit of armor, powered by gears and cranks that boosted human strength far more than before. It was loud and crude in design, but it worked. Prince Denii of the Kingdom of Ife stepped up to wear it. He didn't have an army, but he was desperate for anything to give him back his kingdom. With that heavy armor groaning with every step, he set off alone into the wild, where a few humans were still holding on. When the beasts attacked fast and without mercy, Denis didn't back down. With punches and sword strikes fueled by the armor, he took down 3 of the Fallen. This wasn't just a small win, it was hope coming back to life. News spread fast. Denis returned not just with trophies, but with hope. Amastan's blueprints were copied and shared throughout what was left of the world. Messengers went in all directions. Many didn't make it, but some did. By 1420, the remnants of broken kingdoms began making their own suits. They melted down whatever metal they could, bells, fences, tools, to craft armor and trained in caves, ruins, and forests. The first armies of these mechanized warriors were formed. They called them Guardians. No longer were they weak men in flimsy armor. These were walking tanks, built to fight the Fallen. They came together from their hideouts, struck back at night, and took back old strongholds. Cities began to rise from the ruins. For the first time in 100 years, banners flew again over walls protected by iron and steam giants. They pushed the Fallen back, not wiped out, but driven back. Slowly the world started to heal. Grass returned to the burned fields. Trees grew where none had been for years. Rivers ran clear. It wasn't peace, but it was a hopeful beginning. The Guardians became a symbol of that hard-won light. If you're enjoying this, tap like. It helps more than you think. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe. All right, back to the story. In the overgrown ruins of Orléans, Joan grew up in a village hidden deep in the woods. Most people had forgotten about it. As a kid, she often heard stories about the women who vanished during the Night of Fire, mothers, sisters, and daughters who just disappeared. Some were taken in the night, while others wandered into the woods and never came back. Nobody really talked about it. The pain was still too raw. Joan was haunted by dreams of these women in trouble, catching glimpses of their lives before they were gone. When she turned 16, a wounded knight stumbled into her village after being attacked by beasts. He barely made it, but before he died, he warned her about a swarm headed for Caillemont. Joan decided to hide the knight's armor in the ruins and found herself going back to it often. She felt a strange bond with it and somehow knew how to fix it up. She even convinced an elder to teach her how to fight. Day after day, she practiced until she became a decent fighter. By the time she was 18, she felt ready and set out for Caillemont, where an army was gathering to reclaim an old castle overrun by beasts. She wore the armor she had repaired and strengthened. The general wasn't exactly thrilled to see a woman, but desperate times called for it, so he put her to the test. When she proved she could hold her own, he had to accept her. The other soldiers laughed at her, and some mocked her, while a few felt sorry for her. No one thought she'd last in the battle. Then the fight began. Things went sideways pretty fast. Beasts came pouring out more than they expected, and the soldiers started to panic. They wavered, and the lines began to break. But Joan stood her ground. She climbed a ridge near the gate, her armor all scratched up and burnt. Spotting a nearby flag, she tied a red cloth her mother had given her to the pole and raised it high. "Give us back our women! Give us back our land!" Her voice rang out amid the chaos, reaching those who felt lost. One by one, the soldiers began to rally behind her. By nightfall, Calemont was finally theirs. After Calemont's victory, the New France army set out to strengthen the city. A week later, the King of New France and his personal army arrived, along with a group of guardians known as the Sainted Order, led by an Ember Prior. The king was eager to claim the win for New France and rally support for regaining the whole of France. "Who should I toast among my men?" he asked. The general brought Joan forward and explained her role in the battle. The king raised her hand and the troops cheered. In his royal chambers, the king questioned Joan about where she found the armor and how she learned to use it. Joan talked about visions, which led to her being called a witch. By dawn, she was locked away for 2 weeks. The Ember Prior visited her and ordered the cage opened, declaring that everyone, man, woman, and child, could fight for humanity's freedom. They named Joan a leader of guardians for her bravery at Calemont, and she was given 30 guardian armors. She chose to name herself Joan the Witch, and her group the Order of the Lost Women. Joan swore to defend humanity and keep the flame alive. Her order aimed to discover what happened to women lost at the beginning of the fall, and they decided to join the King of New France in battle. As they campaigned, Joan heard of a village trapped in beast territory beyond the Red Marsh. Other armies had given up on saving them, but Joan wasn't one to back down. She gathered her 30 guardians and set off at night. The marsh was thick with decay and filled with lurking beasts. They pressed on for 2 days with only old maps and tips from a scout. When they found the village, families were hiding in caves, starving. Just as they started to rescue the villagers, the beasts attacked. Joan took charge, drenched from the marsh, her spear glimmering in the moonlight. It wasn't a flawless victory, but they saved most of the villagers. One guardian died, and others were injured, yet the way back felt like a victory, not like a loss. The New France army stood in awe when they returned, carrying kids and elders. Many soldiers decided to join her order after that. Joan fought alongside the king's men in several battles, freeing villages and tackling beast dens. But things started to crumble. The king's army was falling apart, with commanders arguing, supplies running low, and beasts becoming more aggressive. They lost forts as quickly as they regained them, and soldiers were dying, leading to a loss of hope. Moving into a supposed empty area known as the Black Hollow, Joan had a bad feeling. She dreamed of blood-soaked land and warned the general, but he dismissed her concerns. They pushed forward, aiming to reclaim lands once known as Paris, the king's goal. But it was a trap. The beasts were burrowed underground, and when the soldiers crossed, the ground erupted. The guardians faced fierce attacks. Joan and her group fought bravely, but they lost half their guardians, and several commanders were killed. The survivors barely made it out. This loss hit morale hard. Joan felt guilty, wishing she had insisted on pulling her order back. After weeks of tough losses, the king decided to retreat to the safer stronghold in the Pyrenees. He ordered everyone to abandon outposts and those who couldn't keep up. Joan refused to go along. Once she learned whole villages had been left behind, she decided to stay. With her guardians, she gathered farmers, children, and the wounded, leading them toward the mountains. The journey was long and the weather turned cold, but they pressed on. Just a day from safety, the beasts caught up. The guardians formed a protective line, preparing for battle. Joan stood strong in the center, her banner tied to her spear. They held their ground. She screamed, "We are guardians, we will protect." She screamed it again. By the third time, her men echoed it. Joan's last stand bought valuable time for the villagers behind her. Every moment she fought meant one step closer to safety for them. Sadly, she didn't survive, and her body was never found. But the villagers made it to safety. Over 20,000 souls were saved that night. When the king of New France learned of her sacrifice, he was speechless. He had lost face to the people who trooped into the walls and to his subjects. In Joan's sacrifice, he finally grasped what true leadership meant and felt regret. To honor her memory, he called for women interested in becoming guardians. Many stepped forward, looking to protect their families after years of loss. He ensured they were trained as guardians. In her memory, the Order of the Lost Women was reborn, not as just 30 guardians, but as hundreds. They committed to continuing Joan's mission, to protect those in need, reclaim the land, and someday uncover the truth about the stolen women. Margaret the Wolf became the second commander of the Order of Lost Women. Amastan's invention, the mechanized armor, wasn't just a display of power. It offered hope to folks who had been living in fear, hiding from the fallen beasts. Kings put all they had into making and keeping a few armored warriors, mostly to protect the little that was left of their realms. Others aimed to expand their territories for farming and the survival of their people. New kingdoms started popping up everywhere. The armor changed everything, redrew boundaries, and turned tiny villages into fortified city-states, creating nations that never existed before. In some areas, warlords became kings. In others, dreamers built safe havens for humanity's last chance. Many rough, mechanized suits were made during this time, desperate copies by those who didn't have the know-how or materials to replicate the real thing. As more suits came out and more fighters stepped up, people began gathering around Amastan. Craftsmen, soldiers, wanderers, and those looking for a purpose joined him. Many thought the armor was a sign of something bigger. One believer was Kai, a healer from Asia who escaped to Africa before it fell too. He started spreading the idea that Amastain was more than a blacksmith. He was the spark of humanity's creative will. Kai called it the flame of creativity, a force that pushed people to come up with ways to stand against the fallen. His teachings spread quietly, whispered in caves, sung in ruins, scratched onto bits of metal for those who couldn't hear. Over time, these ideas grew into more than just faith. They turned into a mission to keep that flame alive. From Kai's teachings, a group formed called the Order of the Sainted Flame, founded a few years after the first mechanized armor was made. They thought the fire and steam in the suits symbolized the human spirit made mechanical, Amastan's legacy in action. Their aim wasn't just to create armor, it was to keep humanity's will to survive strong. Where others saw machines, they saw determination and purpose. To them, every suit was more than a tool. It held meaning, a piece of civilization standing tall against the odds. They set up their first base at Mount Kirinyaga. From there, they aimed to build the biggest mechanized force ever seen. Putting everything on the line, they mined, built, trained, and prepared a massive army, 100,000 guardians. The walls of Mount Kirinyaga were made with every scrap of metal they could find, fortified with gears, plates, and pipes, turning it into a stronghold for survival. The forges never stopped, glowing like the heart of the mountain. Sparks filled the air day and night. The sound of hammers ringing out across the hills was like humanity's heartbeat, refusing to give up. Mount Kirinyaga would later expand with outposts all around it, creating a safe path to the sea. This defense is called the Dark Smoke Defense, established by the first High Brazier. They trained not just guardians for protection, but also scripter engineers and archivars. These folks, clad in armor, roamed around documenting history on durable steel tablets and bronze walls. They aimed to spark a revival of what made the mechanized Guardian come to life, hoping to create something even better. These scribes etched tales of cities rising and falling, along with heroic names, into metal so that their stories would last. They spread these tablets across ruined lands, believing someone would eventually find them and grasp their significance. The Order didn't want to rule. They just wanted to keep memories alive through the ages. But knowledge brought respect, and respect meant power. Their symbol, a burning brazier, became known worldwide as a sign of protection. They were welcomed in strongholds and had the respect of kings due to their large army. Their armor gleamed with purpose, and wherever they went, there was a hush, not because of fear, but out of respect. Kids looked up to them with wonder, while elders bowed their heads as if they were seeing spirits. As new kings emerged, they turned to the forges of Kirin-Yaga, where the flame burned bright. Being a king meant needing mechanized guardians, and only the Order had the capacity to make them quickly enough to take on the fallen. They wanted not just power, but also the goodwill of the Order, which was crucial since their supporters made up a big portion of the population. In the crumbling remains of old empires, nobles would gather to see new kings suited up, not in fancy fabrics, but in solid steel. The High Brazier didn't sit on a throne. Instead, he worked in a library that doubled as a forge, where he was tasked with creating, strategizing, and planning the Order's next moves. He didn't wear fancy robes or carry a scepter. He wore thick armor, and his voice boomed from a mask designed to sound like fire itself, known as the Noise of the Flame. This helmet was worn only during special ceremonies or the rare times he entered battle. To some, he was a prophet; to others, a creator, a peacemaker. But to everyone who still believed in better days, he was a wielder of the flame. Every kingdom took notice. From the lush shores of Adama to the icy frost marches, rulers acknowledged him, not as something divine, but as a reality they couldn't ignore. Once the High Brazier gave the go-ahead, the Order sent armor to the kings, followed by members who set up small strongholds for training and learning. These places became hubs of resistance, fine-tuning knowledge and keeping the flame alive. Even tiny villages could turn into fortresses if the Order saw potential. But it wasn't just kings interested in the flame. As Amastane's designs spread, other groups began forming their own guardian orders, crafting armored suits powered by gears and steam. There were the Stone Lions, the Ashen Reapers, and the Iron Bloom Guard, all with one mission: beat the fallen. Some fought for deities, others for glory, and some for revenge. But they all traced back to Amastan's designs, returning to Kirin-Yaga for blueprints and following the Flame's rituals to keep their supporters on their side. Plus, they aimed to earn the Covenant's sigil, a metal scroll. Still, the Flame wasn't meant for everyone. Some orders branched off, and certain kings pushed back against the Order's influence, forcing their blacksmiths to create armor on their own, wanting to erase Amastan's name from history. Some succeeded in crafting strange designs, but most ended up failing, overcome by the very beasts they tried to defeat. Even without ruling an empire, the Order's reach was vast. They stood with kings for humanity, ensuring their legacy was recorded in every battle, on every wall, and in every suit. Their warriors fell standing tall, their scribes died while writing, their engineers perished while creating. And while many stories may have ended quietly, none did so in shame. The Trials of the Emberlings. The first guardians of the flame were just regular people wanting to help out, even though they didn't really know what they were doing. Many of them had a tough time, and some even left to start their own groups. The High Brazier soon figured out they couldn't call themselves protectors if they were sending untrained folks into dangerous situations. It felt like a letdown, and went against everything the flame stood for. So, they created the Trials of the Flame, or the Trials of the Emberlings. These trials were designed to teach every guardian what it meant to keep the flame alive. They learned about the flame of creativity, focusing on better ways to make tools and weapons, and the flame of the forge, which meant carrying humanity's hopes with them. The flame had many meanings, and the trials were meant to help them understand all of them. During the trials of the Emberlings, each recruit carried heavy blocks to prepare for the armor they'd eventually wear. The first challenge took place in the Kirin Yaga caves, where it was super hot and the walls sparkled with molten metal. They didn't just face the heat for survival, but to learn how to adapt. Since their armor would get really hot, only those who could handle the heat would make it through combat. For 3 days they had to sit, crawl, and meditate in that heat, all while lugging their weights. Water was hard to find and sleep didn't come easy. This trial showed who was tough and who wasn't. Next came the binding. Each recruit received an old or damaged piece of armor, bent plates and dented bits. Before relying on their suits, they had to really get familiar with them. They learned to forge and shape metal, fixing cracks and adapting to the forge's heat. If their armor failed during a fight, they needed to fix it themselves. It was all about being independent. Their armor was like a second skin, and they had to care for it. Then came the Night of Fire, a night unlike any other. For the first time, they ventured outside the walls, not in armor, but in regular clothes, just carrying a torch, their weights, and a guardian. They walked into wild areas, through ruins and dark woods. The goal was clear: show courage without their armor. The flame taught them that armor is just a tool. Real strength comes from within. Those who ran or hesitated were seen as unworthy, while those who stood strong against the eerie sounds of the night earned respect. The Trial of Pain was the toughest. A steep cliff called the Cliff of Smoke loomed behind the citadel of Kirin Yaga. Weighed down, the recruits had to climb it before noon. Their hands blistered and feet bled on the rough rocks. Some made it to the top, others were pulled back down. The flame only accepted those who rose to the challenge. Next, the trial by fire tested both body and mind. Recruits went through formation drills, one-on-one fights, shield tactics, and battlefield strategies. They learned from Amistan's teachings and how to defend against beast attacks, both solo and in groups. Instructors pushed them hard, training them until they collapsed, and then pushing them even more. This trial wasn't just about winning, it was about standing your ground. Finally, it was Oath Day. Those who made it, less than half of the original group, stood in the Hall of Embers. The High Brazier, the Flame Wardens, and the Great Brazier Flame were all there. One by one, they stepped forward, placed their hands on the anvil, and took their vow to protect humanity, remember the past, and walk like fire given form. Only then were their weights taken off. Only then could they wear the armor. From that moment on, they were no longer Emberlings. They became the guardians of the flame. At the very top of the Order of the Sainted Flame stands the High Brazier, the warder of the flame. Clad in gold-coated guardian armor and crowned with a golden ring, this figure serves as the supreme leader of the Order. Residing in the grand citadel of Mount Kirin Yaga, the High Brazier spends his days deep in ancient manuscripts, crafting new tactics, weapons, and armors in the relentless effort to fight the fallen. Believed to be the keeper of the flame of creativity, only one High Brazier may serve at a time, chosen through a secret conclave of Ember Priors. He alone oversees the global deployment of the Order. Beneath him are the Ember Priors, powerful regional leaders who serve as both military generals and political emissaries. Each one governs an entire kingdom or major region. Many are former flame wardens or archivars, rising through the ranks to command training academies, archives, and entire armies. It is they who extend the flame's reach into distant lands. Flame wardens serve as commanders of local chapters and garrisons. They are responsible for leading squads of mechanized guardians, maintaining forge houses, and guiding their brethren through regular recitations of the Oath of the Flame, a sacred ritual to keep their purpose alive. Whether leading retrieval missions deep into the Beastlands or defending sanctums, Flame Wardens are the pulse of frontline command. The backbone of the Order's might are the Guardians of the Flame, armored warriors who don the sacred guardian suits, each engraved with personal oaths and histories. Sworn to protect cities, relics, and pilgrims alike, they recite the Oath of Fire before every battle, walking as fire given form. Archivars are robed in armor, yet armed with pens and chisels. These monastic scribes travel across the world, recording events in etched steel and maintaining the chronosteel codices. Forbidden from altering truth, even when dangerous, they work closely with flame wardens to ensure history is remembered exactly as it happened. Scriptor engineers are master builders of both faith and forge. These hybrid smiths, trained in theology and engineering, craft armor, weapons, and sacred machinery for the Order. They often lead restoration pilgrimages, venturing into ruins to recover lost relics or repair fallen suits. At the bottom, yet holding the most potential, are the Emberlings, boys and girls taken from fallen settlements and raised in the citadels. There they are trained in literacy, martial skill, engineering, and belief. Before earning their place, they must recite the Oath of Flame. Some go on to become guardians, others archivars or scriptor engineers. Not everyone follows this path, though. Ash disciples are those who have turned away, former warriors or priests who broke their vows. They are cast out to face tough missions to burn away the ash. Some return changed, others disappear, and a few become known as martyrs. This force act as the cannon folders for the Order, sent on missions. The military structure of the Order begins with the Fire Squad, a basic unit of 8 to 14 soldiers led by a blaze vanguard. 3 to 4 fire squads form a flame platoon, consisting of 20 to 50 soldiers under a flame warden's command. Several flame platoons, typically 3 to 5, combine into an Inferno Mountain, a larger force of 100 to 250 soldiers, led by a flame warden or sometimes an ember prior. When 3 to 5 Inferno Mountains gather, they become a fiery compartment, a powerful force of up to 1,000 soldiers led by an Ember Prior. From there, 2 to 5,000 troops make up a blazing brigade, commanded only by an Ember Sovereign or an Ember Prior who once held that rank. And finally, at the pinnacle of the army, stands the Flame Wheel, a massive deployment of over 10,000 soldiers, led by none other than the High Brazier himself. This is the hierarchy, this is the Order, and this is how the flame endures. After finishing a tough training called the Trial of the Emberlings that went on for months and focused on combat, surviving the heat, taking care of their gear, and working as a team, each recruit earned their place as a guardian. The welcoming ceremony was straightforward. They got their guardian suits, which included sturdy armor, a basic iron helmet, a steel shield, and a strong spear for fighting off tough beasts. They became Spark Sentinels, easily recognized by their gray helmets that indicated their rank on the battlefield. Every Spark Sentinel wore a flame badge on the upper left of their chest plate, showing that they had completed their training and officially joined the Order. They were front-line fighters dealing with beast threats, protecting strongholds, escorting civilians, and helping out at outposts. They worked under red helmets and flame wardens, making up the core of deployment teams. If they performed bravely in battle, they could earn extra flame badges given out by a flame warden. Earning these badges wasn't easy, since Spark Sentinels mostly fought in organized groups. Those who shined over time could be promoted to Blaze Vanguard, recognized by their red helmets. These Guardians had experience and could take charge in the field. With this new title, they could also create their own weapons at the Order's foundries with help from engineers. Some chose hammers or glaives, while others picked long axes or custom swords. Each weapon was recorded in the Flame Archives as part of the Guardian's identity. This rank also came with leadership over a fire squad, made up of 8 to 14 Spark Sentinels, unless they were assigned special tasks, like personal protection for an Ember Prior. Becoming a Blaze Vanguard also brought the first gold plate, engraved with the individual's personal oath, which was placed on the shoulder guard. Some suits had multiple oath plates, especially if the previous owner had died and the armor was passed down. In those cases, the second plate would go on the opposite shoulder or in another spot on the armor. Above the Blaze Vanguard were the Ember Sovereigns, known for their gold helmets. This group was the top tier, Guardians who had led squads and major campaigns. Their helmets were made from a tough metal and had a rugged look that set them apart. Ember Sovereigns could lead a blazing brigade made up of 2,000 to 5,000 Guardians, usually for big missions or important operations. With this rank, they also got 2 more gold plates. The oath plate on the chest featured the Ember Sovereign's personal vow, while the second plate, called the unit plate, was attached to the belt or side of the armor, showing the name of their unit or army, or their full name if they were part of a larger group. Ember Sovereigns headed major missions, beast hunts, and cleanup operations at fortresses. Their presence signaled the importance of the mission. A group of them meant something big was going down. Many Ember Sovereigns were later considered for the rank of Flame Warden, a title that was given, not claimed. The Order selected Flame Wardens after carefully reviewing each person's battle history, leadership skills, emotional control, and strategic thinking. A group of Ember Sovereigns was called a Flame Legion, a sign of strong teamwork, great coordination, and power within the Order of the Sainted Flame. Welcome to the Story Crucible. If you're into world building, medieval warfare, giant monsters, and mech-powered soldiers, you're in the right place. Please hit the like button. It helps the channel and tells me you want more stories like this. Subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment or question. I read every one. This is Mechieval.